David Foster Wallace was an award-winning and best-selling novelist. A few years ago, he gave a commencement address at Kenyon College, which the Wall Street Journal thought was worth publishing. It basically came to their attention because the address was such a grim portrayal of the graduates' future lives. Wallace talked to the graduates about how they would face boredom, routine, and petty frustration according to what they worshiped in life. Now, he also talked to them about a kind of grace that they could experience if they chose to get beyond what he called, the phrase he used, their own tiny skull-sized kingdoms. He talked about a grace that's discovered when one pays attention to others and to the world outside. But what really caught the attention of the Wall Street Journal was that Foster Wallace basically challenged their atheism. This is what he said. He said, "Here's something else that's weird but true. In the day-to-day trenches of adult life, there is actually no such thing as atheism. There is no such thing as not worshiping. Everybody worships. The only choice we get is what to worship. And the compelling reason to believe in God is that pretty much anything else you worship will eat you alive." And he went on to talk about the different things that these college graduates were perhaps, some of them at least, worshiping. He said, if you worship money and things, if they are where you tap the real meaning in life, then you will never have enough, never feel you have enough. Secondly, he said, if you worship your body and beauty and sexual allure, you will always feel ugly. And when time and age start showing, you will die a million deaths before they finally grieve you. Thirdly, he said, if you worship power, you will end up feeling weak and afraid, and you will need ever more power over others to numb you to your own fear. And last, he said, if you worship intellect, being seen as smart, you will end up feeling stupid, a fraud, always on the verge of being found out. Now, the insidious things about these forms of worship is not that they're evil or sinful. It's that they're basically, a lot of the time, unconscious. They're the default settings. And we live in a world today where many people unconsciously go about life on these default settings of worshiping money and power and their bodies and their sexual allure and things, and still believing that they're atheists, worshiping no God. But they have lots of gods, so they're wrong. They do worship, and in so many cases, they're eaten alive by what they worship, and stuck in that great phrase he used, their tiny skull-sized kingdoms. What so many of us need today is what Peter, James, and John experienced on Mount Tabor. They had an experience of God that changed their lives forever. They had an experience of God that jolted them out of their tiny skull-sized kingdoms. They had an experience of something so outside of themselves that they were never the same again, and they could never worship what they had worshiped before. Now, for you and me, Lent is the perfect time for us to struggle to get beyond our tiny skull-sized kingdoms and do some reflecting on what is it that we are worshiping? Is it eating us alive? Are we even aware of what we are worshiping? Are we living on default settings in this rat race of a world that we find ourselves in? And have we lost something in what we worship? Have we lost a sense of that which is truly sacred? Now, you may well remember this gentleman, Francis Collins. He was a researcher, a physician, and his credentials and accomplishments are well respected in the scientific community. He headed up the Human Genome Project before he served as the director of the National Institutes of Health. In 2007, he wrote a New York Times best-selling book entitled The Language of God, which basically weaves together the story of his work as a world-renowned scientist and also his journey from atheism to a strong belief in God and centered in Jesus Christ. It was when he was a gifted medical student that he came to the realization that it was just not convenient to believe in any God or to deal with any kind of God. But then, after he got his medical degree, one of his patients told him about her faith. And then she said, "Doc, what about you? What do you believe?" And in his own words, he said, I stuttered and stammered and felt color rising in my face. And I said, "Well, I don't believe in anything." But suddenly I realized, he said, that was a very thin answer. And it was very unsettling for me. So he went into his own journey. He talked to a number of priests, and he read a great deal of C.S. Lewis, and finally he had an experience. And this is how he describes his life-changing encounter. He said, "I had to make a choice. A full year had passed since I decided not to believe in any kind of God. And now I was being called into account. On a beautiful fall day, as I was hiking in the Cascade Mountains during my first trip west of the Mississippi, the majesty and the beauty of God's creation overwhelmed my resistance. As I rounded a corner and saw a beautiful and unexpected frozen waterfall, hundreds of feet high, I knew the search was over. The next morning, I knelt in the dewy grass as the sun rose, and then I had an experience that changed me forever. I began to believe in a force, a God so much bigger than my small little world of intellect and science." So for you and me, this second Sunday of our Lenten season, the important question I think for us to reflect upon is, what do we worship? Are we even fully aware of that, what we are worshiping, or have we unconsciously slipped into our own tiny skull-sized kingdoms of worship without even realizing it? And is what we are worshiping, is it really eating us alive? Now, our world will certainly not discourage us from this kind of worship. Our world will not discourage us from living in these default settings, because our world is all about wanting and achieving and having more than somebody else and being better and more beautiful or more handsome than somebody else, and believing that this is truly what freedom is. But as David Foster Wallace continued to talk to those graduates, he pointed out to them what true freedom really consisted in. And he pointed out 3 points to them. That it involves, true freedom involves attention, awareness, and discipline, and being able to truly care about other people and to sacrifice for them over and over in myriad, petty, and very unsexy ways every single day. And this kind of true freedom, I believe, only comes when we've had that earth-shaking transfiguration. when each of us goes on our own journey, when we get beyond our tiny skull-sized kingdoms and believe in something more powerful than ourselves, more important than money or power or beauty or sexual allure or things. David Foster Wallace challenged those graduates at Kenyon College that they would face boredom and routine and petty frustrations if they didn't at least admit that they weren't atheists, that they all worshiped something, and if they stayed in their own tiny skull-sized kingdoms, worshiping that which would always disappoint them, they would never experience that real freedom. Real freedom results from having an experience of the ultimate and caring for one another in very unsexy ways. Peter, James, and John had that kind of transfiguration on Mount Tabor. Interestingly enough for them, it was so powerful that they wanted to stay there. They came to the realization that they were caught up in their own tiny skull-sized kingdoms, and they didn't want to go back. Jesus sent them back. He sent them back with a new awareness of what was really important in life and a new kind of freedom. And they had to go back and jump into all the mundane challenges that confront all of us. But they went back with this experience of the ultimate, and life was never the same again. They never could worship what they had worshiped before. So as we continue on in this Lenten season, what about us? Will we allow the Lenten season to free us from our tiny skull-sized kingdoms? Will we allow the Lenten season to help us to be open to an experience of the ultimate and never be the same again and never be able to worship what we worshiped before?